The Corn Exchange at Flaxborough possessed that particular atmosphere of damp bunting and civic optimism which marked all successful municipal gatherings. The annual Flower and Produce Show had achieved its customary state of organized gentility, with prize marrows arranged in ponderous dignity alongside regimented jars of preserves that gleamed like stained glass in a particularly practical chapel. The morning air carried the mingled fragrances of sweet peas, furniture polish, and that faint mustiness which seemed to emanate from the Victorian building's red brick walls regardless of season or circumstance. Inspector Pubright stood near the refreshment table, observing the proceedings with the detached interest of a man who had learned to find entertainment in the rituals of respectability. He had attended not in any official capacity, but because Sergeant Love's wife had insisted that a representative of the constabulary should show willing at community events. The inspector found such occasions oddly restful, requiring nothing, more taxing than the occasional nod of appreciation for a particularly impressive leak. Mayor Crispin Hartover arrived precisely at 11 o'clock, resplendent in his chain of office and attended by Lucy Denby, his secretary, who moved with the quick efficiency of someone accustomed to anticipating grammatical lapses. The mayor possessed that particular brand of civic dignity which came from years of practice at appearing interested in matters he privately considered tedious. His speeches had achieved local fame for their ability to say nothing memorable while sounding appropriately ceremonial. The prize presentations began with customary efficiency. Mrs. Pemberton, the show steward, moved between displays with the authority of a general reviewing troops, her clipboard clutched like a ceremonial sword. The judges, Dr. Naylor, retired headmaster, Mrs. Troke from the Women's Institute, and Leonard Vellum, the town librarian, had completed their deliberations with appropriate gravity. The roses occupied the place of honor near the main entrance, their blooms arranged with the artistic precision that spoke of genuine passion, rather than mere competitive spirit. The winning display belonged to Beryl Glossop, whose hybrid tea roses had achieved that perfect balance of form and fragrance which marked the true enthusiast's work. Mayor Hartover approached the rose display, with his usual measured stride, Lucy Denby at his elbow ready to provide any necessary prompting. He reached for the small envelope pinned to the Best Roses card with a brass drawing pin, a touch Mrs. Pemberton had declared nice. The mayor took up the envelope with a little rustle, intended for microphones that were not present. He opened it, and even his practiced smile faltered. "Well now," he said, because something had to be said. He withdrew a stiff buff card, its edges cleanly cut, the typing neat enough to pass for careful handwriting. The hall seemed to lean in as he cleared his throat. "Until debts to Coventry are settled, no honour shall remain untainted." The word Coventry travelled faster than the mayor's glance could settle. A hum arose that might have been appreciation or indigestion. Some thought at once of the cathedral city, while others, perhaps more interested in local practice, considered the older meaning, the social punishment in which an offender is rendered invisible. The roses, which had never been so much as reprimanded, received a number of scrutinizing glances they could not use. Lucy Denby, who had been poised to hand over a microphone that did not exist, went quite pale. She possessed the air of someone to whom a private reminder had appeared on public paper. Her lips pressed together as if seeking a safer version of themselves. Leonard Vellum stood nearby, affecting distance from everyone, including himself. His expression settled into the attentive neutrality librarians reserve for donors of inadequate first editions. He adjusted his spectacles, which captured the fluorescent glare, and gave him a faintly ecclesiastical aspect. Inspector Pubright found himself observing the mayor's hands, which had the constraint of a man who wished to put something down but feared the consequences. The inspector's face retained its customary mildness, It was his habit to allow circumstances to assemble themselves comfortably before troubling them with purpose. He noticed Lucy's pallor, Vellum's studied composure, and the way the assembled aldermen became, collectively, furniture. Around them, the town expressed itself with characteristic efficiency. Mrs. Troke produced a small sniff intended to consign anonymous notices to the same class as dirty teaspoons. Dr. Naylor murmured that the phrasing betrayed a mind that values correctness without kindness. Leo Biddle, the bookseller who advertised his contempt for popular taste on a blackboard in his window, smiled as a man smiles at an epigram he did not write but would have. The mayor recovered sufficiently to suggest it might be a little joke, perhaps, glancing at Beryl Glossop as if florists were a humorous class. Beryl, whose arms were as muscular as her roses were delicate, met the glance stoically. "My roses don't owe Coventry a penny," she declared, drawing a relieved chuckle from those grateful to be allowed one. Pubright lifted the buff card when the mayor held it for examination. It possessed the substantial feel of institutional stationery, made to live in drawers and be consulted with deference. The typing showed the firmness of a machine old enough to be particular about its work. Most intriguingly, a scent clung to it that belonged neither to roses nor the general atmosphere. A suggestion of lavender, not the flower but the polish, the domestic insistence that everything in a glass case should gleam with purpose. He looked up to find Leonard Vellum already not looking at him, the librarian's gaze taking in the cornice, the clock, his own cuff, examining anything to avoid acknowledging that he had noticed something else. Lucy Denby had arranged herself into administrative briskness, which served as feminine armor in public life. Mrs. Pemberton, summoned to explain the envelope's provenance, wore the serene defiance of a woman whose committee had never erred. "Nothing pinned there by my instruction," she announced with satisfaction. "Envelopes on the cakes only. A floral area is not a letterbox." The ceremony resumed, though each subsequent applause contained an inquiry, and each smile returned from a brief errand somewhere more serious. Pubright remained where chance had positioned him, accepting a paper cup of ginger wine and reflecting on how curious it was that a card, if correctly cut and politely typed, could disturb more surely than a shout. The roses, indisputably blameless, kept their counsel and retained their prize, as roses, being uninterested in municipal debts, generally do. He did not yet know what the debt was, or to whom it was owed, but he suspected the repayment, like most local settlements, would prefer to be arranged without receipts. The corn exchange emptied with the measured dignity of a congregation departing after a sermon that had hinted at personal sin without naming parishioners. The mysterious message had introduced a more compelling entertainment than any prize-winning marrow could provide, and Flaxborough's citizens distributed themselves strategically throughout the town to continue their investigations in acoustically favourable locations. Moldham's tea rooms received the first concentrated wave of speculation, its tables serving as editorial boards where theories multiplied with the efficiency of a well-organised postal system. Mrs. Chubb, whose late husband's council service had equipped her with institutional memory, held court near the window with the authority of someone married to official information. There was that civic exchange visit to Coventry in 1972, she announced to her assembled audience, which included Mrs. Pemberton and two ladies from the Mothers' Union who leaned forward with archaeological dedication. Very modern in parts, but there were questions about expenses. Harold Peebles was quite flustered about the hotel receipts. My Stan said the gentleman with the peculiar moustache promised an inter-urban partnership and then forgot to write. Dr. Naylor, who had met retirement with the same disapproval he once reserved for boys who conjugated Latin, credibly, but without joy, occupied a corner table with territorial authority. His pronouncement on anonymous discourtesy had been refined through several tellings into a small lecture on declining standards. "In my experience," he declared to anyone within earshot, "those who lack courage for signed correspondence invariably possess minds that value correctness without charity. The phrasing, 'No honour shall remain untainted,' betrays a writer who reads prefaces and envies their authority." Anonymous reproach belongs to a class of offences more vulgar than theft, a misdemeanour against manliness. Harold Peebles had arrived looking as if personally accused of embezzling cathedral restoration funds. His usual pink complexion had achieved a deeper shade, suggesting either high blood pressure or guilty knowledge. He stirred his tea with mechanical persistence, occasionally glancing toward the door as if expecting either rescue or arrest. The upcoming library modernization vote pressed on his consciousness like a door that might lock from the outside. Mrs. Lydia Troke, secretary of the Women's Institute and guardian of proper procedure, had established herself at the central table with commanding presence. Her handbag sat beside her teacup like a small fortress, and she periodically withdrew a blue pencil to make corrections in what appeared to be committee minutes. "The vulgarity of typed accusations," she announced, with authority born of never. "Having sent anonymous letters but understanding the principles involved shows a lack of pen. You only examine the minutes of any well-run meeting to learn that clear, handwritten amendments are signs of character. The use of honour with a U is merely orthographic decency." Leo Biddle entered with the languid grace of a man who had been waiting for precisely this sort of municipal entertainment. The bookseller possessed that particular brand of sardonic amusement which comes from observing human folly without feeling obligated to correct it. "I could have composed something more literary," he announced to the room, settling with theatrical precision. "The phrasing lacks elegance. Until debts to Coventry are settled. Pedestrian construction, really. A properly educated anonymous correspondent would have managed something with more style. Perhaps, 'The unholy ghost of civic malfeasance shall haunt your municipal slumber.'" This earned him several glances reserved for people who criticize burglars' technique while their houses are being robbed. Mrs. Troke's blue pencil paused above her minutes, as if considering whether literary criticism of anonymous letters required official notation. Leonard Vellum's absence from the tea rooms provided fertile ground for speculation. "Libraries keep records of everything," observed Mrs. Pemberton with committee authority. "Leonard would know exactly who borrowed what books about Coventry, and when. Very methodical man, keeps everything filed properly." The conversation drifted toward the library modernization vote, which had generated considerable controversy among those believing progress should be achieved without disturbing familiar arrangements. Harold Peebles muttered to his teacup about postponements and questions, funding questions, necessity questions, architectural survey questions. Inspector Pubright entered at 20 minutes past 1, ostensibly seeking lunch, but primarily interested in the atmospheric pressure of local speculation. He possessed the useful ability to appear completely absorbed in sandwich selection while cataloguing every conversation within earshot. The establishment's discussions had achieved that comfortable volume, indicating everyone was talking and no one particularly listening, except those specifically employed to do so. He chose a table near the kitchen door, which provided excellent acoustics for overhearing without appearing to eavesdrop. Mrs. Chubb had moved from the 1972 Coventry visit to more recent civic irregularities, including mysterious disappearances of historical photographs from the town hall display case.
Nothing valuable, you understand, just old pictures of municipal delegations and ribbon-cutting ceremonies. But who would want such things, and why take them without asking? Harold Peebles went quite pale during this discussion, his teacup rattling.
against its saucer with increasing frequency. He excused himself with explanations about municipal records requiring immediate attention, leaving behind impressions of either dedicated duty or anxious avoidance. The inspector finished his sandwich and departed with satisfaction at having learned considerably more than anyone intended to tell him. The velocity of gossip, he reflected, was matched only by its accuracy in revealing guilty consciences of those protesting innocence most vigorously. By tea-time, the mysterious message would travel through every Flaxborough household, gathering interpretations and accusations like a snowball rolling downhill. The truth, whatever it might prove to be, would compete with a dozen theories, each more colourful than facts were likely to support. And beneath it all lingered that faint, domestic scent of lavender polish, a detail the town's eager theorists had overlooked in their haste to manufacture meanings, but which clung to Pubright's memory like evidence that refused to be ignored. The following morning brought Inspector Pubright to the methodical business of inquiry, which he approached with the unhurried precision of someone who understood that facts, like good wine, improved with patient attention. His first visit took him to Mrs. Pemberton's terraced house on Gladstone Street, where the show steward received him in a sitting room that suggested committee work was merely domestic organisation applied to larger spaces. Mrs. Pemberton possessed the comfortable authority of someone who had organised successful events for 30 years without losing so much as a raffle prize. Her explanation of the morning's arrangements carried the precision of military logistics combined with the moral certainty of someone who had never been wrong about procedure. Only committee members had access to the prize cards, she declared, consulting a notebook that appeared to contain the organisational history of Flaxborough's cultural life. Leonard Vellum from the library, Dr. Naylor, Mrs. Troke from the Women's Institute, and myself. We prepared everything Thursday evening in the vestry at St. Bartholomew's. Each card was checked twice and placed in its proper envelope. Pubright accepted tea and inquired about the specific envelope containing the mysterious message. Mrs. Pemberton's certainty wavered slightly like a compass encountering unexpected magnetic interference. That's the peculiar thing, Inspector. There shouldn't have been an envelope pinned to the roses at all. Envelopes were for the preserve classes only. Mrs. Glossop's roses required just the standard winner's card. Someone must have added it afterward, though I cannot imagine when or how. The inspector learned that keys to the Corn Exchange were held by the caretaker, the mayor's office, and herself. The trophy case, however, required a separate key kept in the steward's tin, which remained on her person during events except for brief necessities. His next call took him to Minnie Tooth, the Corn Exchange charwoman, whom he found in the building's basement surrounded by cleaning equipment that suggested she took municipal hygiene personally. Minnie received him with the suspicious courtesy reserved for authority figures who might represent either opportunity or trouble. Saw someone near the rose display around 9:30, she admitted after establishing that Pubright was neither offering employment nor threatening prosecution. Couldn't see proper like what with the morning light coming through them tall windows. Person had a poster tube, the cardboard kind you get from the post office, tall, wearing a cap, moved off quick when I came round with the dustpan. Pubright asked about her cleaning routine, learning that Minnie had arrived early to prepare the hall. She had noticed nothing unusual except for her own mishap near the trophy case. Knocked over my lavender polish while dusting the glass, she explained with professional embarrassment. Made a right mess, I did. Had to clean it up proper before anyone noticed. That case is only for committee members to open. They've got the only key. I was wiping the key itself when Mrs. Pemberton came over, all urgent about something, and I dropped the bottle. The lavender scent from the mysterious card suddenly acquired geographical precision. Pubright made careful note of this domestic accident that had left aromatic evidence on materials accessible only to committee members. Beryl Glossop, whom he found arranging funeral tributes with architectural precision, provided details about the prize card delivery. Her hands, permanently stained green from professional contact with stems and thorns, moved among white chrysanthemums while she spoke. Prize cards arrived Wednesday afternoon in a brown paper parcel, she explained. Left on the doorstep while I was at the wholesaler's. No delivery note, no signature. I assumed it was the usual committee arrangement, though it struck me as rather informal. The brown paper parcel troubled Purbright's sense of proper procedure. Committee business usually travelled through official channels, not anonymous doorstep deliveries. He inquired who might have known about her Wednesday routine.
Anyone could have observed my schedule, Beryl admitted. I go to the wholesalers every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, regular as clockwork, return around 4. Mrs. Hartwell next door could tell you exactly when I water my window boxes. The Rudge.
Brothers' printing firm occupied a narrow shop that seemed to exist in permanent twilight. The elder brother examined the buff card with professional interest, holding it up to catch light that appeared to have been rationed since the war. "Not our stock," he pronounced with certainty born of 40 years in the trade. "We use white card for local work, cream for special occasions. This buff quality is more institutional, library-like, if you follow me. The weight suggests government surplus, the sort of thing councils buy in bulk and store in cupboards until needed." His assessment confirmed Purbright's growing suspicions about the card's origins. Someone with access to institutional supplies had selected materials with deliberate care, suggesting planning rather than spontaneous malice. His final encounter of the morning occurred outside the municipal offices where he met Leonard Vellum ascending the steps with a folder under his arm. The librarian's expression suggested he had not expected to find an inspector between himself and the first floor at that precise moment. "Mr. Vellum," Purbright said pleasantly, "I wonder if you ever discard any of your older catalogue cards." "Only in accordance with proper procedure," Vellum replied, with the careful precision of someone accustomed to providing accurate information while revealing nothing beyond what was specifically requested. "The library maintains extensive records. We prefer to retire information rather than destroy it." Purbright nodded as one professional acknowledging another. He watched Vellum disappear into the building, his footsteps measured, his spine making an argument for correct filing systems. Walking slowly back toward the police station, the inspector reflected on his morning's collection. Someone had invested considerable effort in creating the anonymous message, selecting materials and timing with professional attention to detail. The lavender scent connected the card to the trophy case, accessible only to committee members. The buff cardstock suggested library origins, while the careful typing indicated planning rather than impulse. Most tellingly, the mysterious correspondent had chosen to remain invisible while demanding visible accountability from others, a contradiction that suggested someone more comfortable with procedure than confrontation, more at ease with institutional authority than personal challenge. The pieces were beginning to align, though Purbright kept these preliminary conclusions to himself. In his experience, guilty parties often betrayed themselves more readily when they believed their cleverness had passed unnoticed. By Thursday afternoon, Flaxborough had achieved that comfortable consensus which marks a community's determination to solve its problems with dispatch rather than accuracy. Leo Biddle, whose bookshop window served as a weekly bulletin of municipal criticism, had emerged as the obvious culprit in the collective wisdom of those who preferred their mysteries resolved before tea time. Superintendent Chubb arrived at the police station wearing the satisfied expression of a man who had received helpful telephone calls from several councillors, all suggesting that swift action against known troublemakers would demonstrate appropriate civic vigour. His notebook contained what he considered compelling evidence, gathered with the enthusiasm of someone whose theories had found supporting facts. "Biddle's our man, Purbright," Chubb announced, settling his considerable frame into the visitor's chair. That vintage Remington typewriter of his, for starters. Mrs. Hartwell saw him typing Tuesday evening, and he admits to composing what he calls various letters on the subject of civic cant, though naturally he denies this particular incident. Pubright accepted this assessment with the polite attention he reserved for theories that arrived fully formed before evidence had been properly examined. The superintendent's enthusiasm for obvious solutions had proven reliable in straightforward cases, but the inspector had learned to regard community consensus with the same healthy skepticism. He applied to coincidence. His window displays read like weekly indictments, Chubb continued, consulting his notes. Last month he featured the decline and fall of the Roman Empire with a card suggesting it was essential reading for anyone interested in municipal parallels, practically inciting rebellion. The bookseller's reputation for literary mischief had been established through years of carefully crafted provocations that managed to remain just within the boundaries of actionable offence. His establishment occupied a narrow building on Market Street, where volumes served as both merchandise and architectural support, creating an atmosphere of organised rebellion against municipal orthodoxy. Pubright found Biddle that afternoon, arranging a window display that appeared to comment on recent events without explicitly acknowledging them. A copy of Anonymous Letters Through History occupied the central position, flanked by works on civic responsibility and social ostracism. The arrangement possessed the subtle wit of someone who understood that suggestion often proved more effective than direct accusation. Leo Biddle received the inspector with the languid courtesy of someone who had been expecting official attention and had prepared appropriate responses. His shop smelled of old paper, binding glue, and that particular mixture of dust and quiet rebellion that marked establishments where learning was treated as a form of gentle warfare. "Inspector Pubright," Biddle said, gesturing toward a chair that appeared to be upholstered in bound volumes of parliamentary proceedings. "I assume you're here about yesterday's anonymous entertainment, quite dramatically staged, though I must say the literary quality left something to be desired." The bookseller's manner suggested he regarded the investigation as an intellectual exercise rather than serious inquiry. He confirmed owning the Remington typewriter, admitting to regular correspondence with various municipal departments on matters of civic improvement, but denied authorship of the mysterious message with the air of someone declining credit for inferior work. "If I had composed an anonymous reproach," he explained with academic precision, "I would have managed something with more style. The phrase, 'no honour shall remain untainted,' lacks elegance. A properly educated correspondent would have achieved greater literary effect with less melodrama." Pubright examined the typewriter, noting its distinctive font and mechanical precision. The machine appeared capable of producing the anonymous message, though Biddle's willingness to display it suggested either innocence or considerable confidence in his ability to avoid detection. "You seem remarkably familiar with the wording," the inspector observed mildly. "My dear inspector, the entire town has memorized that message by now. Mrs. Chubb recited it verbatim at the post office this morning, complete with dramatic emphasis. I suspect half of Flaxborough could reproduce it from memory." The conversation revealed Biddle's extensive knowledge of municipal affairs and his particular interest in the library modernization controversy. He spoke with the authority of someone who had made civic observation a professional hobby, cataloguing official follies with the dedication of a natural historian. "Besides," Biddle continued, producing a file of his published letters to the local paper, "I sign my work, anonymous. Letters are for the morally asthmatic. Why hide behind institutional stationery when my window provides a more effective platform for municipal critique?" The bell tinkled, and Lucy Denby entered, brisk as paperwork. She started at the sight of Pubright, then composed herself into secretarial neutrality. "Mr. Biddle, the mayor wondered if you had any pamphlets on urban partnerships," she said. Something historical but optimistic. I can offer historical, Biddle replied. Optimism costs extra. He fetched a thin booklet titled Cooperation, Continuity, Coventry, and handed it over with theatrical solemnity. Lucy accepted it with precise thanks and withdrew, leaving behind the impression of someone who had accomplished something more delicate than shopping. Yet Pubright found himself increasingly sceptical of Biddle's guilt. The bookseller's provocations were invariably public, signed, and designed to attract maximum attention. Anonymous letters represented a fundamental contradiction of his established methods. Why operate in shadows when his window provided such an effective stage for municipal criticism? In your experience with anonymous correspondence, the inspector asked as he prepared to leave, what type of person typically chooses such methods? Biddle considered this with genuine academic interest. Those who value procedure over courage, Inspector. Anonymous correspondents generally prefer institutional authority to personal confrontation. They write from positions of respectability rather than rebellion. This assessment struck Pubright as particularly insightful and somewhat inconsistent with Biddle's own character. The bookseller had never shown reluctance to associate publicly with unpopular opinions. Returning to the station, Pubright reflected on the case's developing complexities. The town had produced its preferred villain with characteristic efficiency, but his instincts suggested the truth lay in less theatrical directions. Someone had invested considerable effort in creating an anonymous accusation while ensuring suspicion fell upon the community's most visible critic, a strategy that demonstrated both planning and intimate knowledge of local prejudices. The real correspondent, he suspected, remained safely hidden among those respectable citizens who had been so eager to identify obvious alternatives. Inspector Pubright returned to his desk with the anonymous message, treating it with the respectful attention one might accord a witness who preferred to whisper. The buff card lay in its protective sleeve, looking remarkably composed for something that had caused such municipal disturbance. He held it toward the window where Friday morning light revealed details that had escaped Thursday's excitement. The lavender scent persisted with domestic determination, though fainter now, not the floral sweetness of gardens, but the practical fragrance of furniture polish applied with professional thoroughness. More intriguingly, a small, pale blue mark appeared in the lower right corner, so faint it might have been dismissed as natural discoloration by anyone not specifically hunting for human traces. The mark possessed the precise character of a pencil. Tick, the sort used to indicate completion or approval. Its position suggested someone had checked the card against procedure, marking it satisfactory before proceeding. The blue color was distinctive, not ordinary graphite, but the particular shade favored by those who corrected documents with editorial authority. Pubright's memory supplied recent encounters with similar markings. Mrs. Troke's committee minutes bristled with such corrections, her blue pencil serving as both instrument and symbol of secretarial precision. She had displayed that pencil with proprietary pride, withdrawing it from her handbag like a small sword whenever grammatical irregularities required attention. He walked to the Corn Exchange, finding Minnie Tooth applying polish to surfaces that already gleamed with professional devotion. She greeted him with the cautious friendliness reserved for authority figures who had proven capable of reasonable conversation. "About that lavender polish you spilled," Pubright began conversationally. "You mentioned the trophy case key," Minnie nodded vigorously. "Right mess I made, Inspector. The key was in the lock. Mrs. Pemberton had opened the case to arrange trophies. I was wiping glass when my elbow caught the bottle. Went everywhere. Key, lock, even inside the case. Anyone touching that key afterward would carry the scent. Away. This transformed the lavender from mysterious clue to practical evidence. The anonymous message had acquired its aromatic signature through contact with someone who had handled the contaminated key, someone with legitimate access and official reasons for being present. At the municipal offices, Leonard Vellum received him in a corner workspace that served as shrine to proper cataloguing. His desk supported neat stacks of withdrawal cards, correspondence, and reference materials arranged with geometric precision. Several blue pencil marks appeared on various documents, though these seemed standard corrections rather than the specific tick observed on the anonymous message. "Mr. Vellum," Pubright said pleasantly, "I'm curious about your catalogue card system. Do you ever use buff-coloured stock?" The librarian's response carried careful precision. Buff cards are used for withdrawn items, books removed from circulation, but retained for reference. They're stored separately from active entries. The explanation provided another puzzle piece. Buff cards represented materials in transition, neither fully present nor completely absent from the collection. Someone with access could easily appropriate a card without creating obvious gaps in the filing system. And these withdrawn cards, who would have access, myself primarily, the assistant librarian occasionally, though she prefers leaving technical matters to my judgment, we maintain strict procedures regarding catalogue integrity. Walking toward the post office, Pubright encountered Mrs. Troke emerging with packages suggesting Women's Institute business conducted with military efficiency. Her handbag hung from her arm like a small fortress containing essential organizational tools. "Mrs. Troke," he said pleasantly, "I wonder if you might help with a small puzzle. Do you recall making corrections with your blue pencil recently?" She paused, regarding him with suspicious attention. "I make corrections constantly, Inspector. Proper grammar requires vigilance. My minutes contain numerous amendments. Blue pencil indicates editorial authority." The inspector nodded appreciatively, noting how her hand moved instinctively toward her handbag when discussing the pencil. The gesture suggested both pride in editorial tools and protective concern for their security. "Your pencil has a distinctive color, quite professional. Purchased specifically for committee work," she replied with satisfaction. "The proper shade indicates serious editorial intention. I would never use ordinary graphite for official corrections." Yet something in her manner suggested the blue pencil had acquired significance beyond its editorial function. Her fingers lingered near the handbag clasp as if checking that essential equipment remained secure. Back at the station, Pubright examined the evidence with renewed interest. The small blue tick had begun acquiring meaning through accumulated observations. Someone had marked the card with editorial approval, using a distinctive pencil that suggested either access to Mrs. Troke's equipment or possession of similar professional tools. The mark's position indicated careful verification, the sort used by someone who approached even anonymous correspondence with procedural thoroughness. Combined with the lavender scent's connection to the trophy case key, the evidence pointed towards someone with legitimate access to both institutional supplies and committee materials. The anonymous correspondent was emerging from shadows not as a figure of rebellion, but of respectability, someone who valued procedure enough to check their work even when seeking to remain invisible. The investigation was beginning to focus on a smaller, more respectable circle than the town's eager theorists had imagined. Someone among Flaxborough's most trusted citizens had composed that message with institutional materials and editorial precision, then delivered it with the confidence that comes from understanding exactly how municipal ceremonies operate. Pubright filed his observations with characteristic patience. The truth, like good evidence, would reveal itself when properly encouraged rather than forcibly extracted. The weekend brought Inspector Pubright deeper into Flaxborough's municipal machinery, where he discovered that respectability, like institutional polish, required constant application to maintain its proper shine. His investigation had reached that useful stage where the more virtuous citizens began presenting themselves as examples of civic propriety, a development he observed with the mild interest of someone who understood that virtue rarely introduced, itself without an agenda. The library occupied a Victorian building whose reading room possessed the hushed authority of a secular cathedral. Leonard Vellum moved among his collections with proprietary grace, currently arranging materials for a historical exhibition that demonstrated both educational purpose and subtle advocacy. His project, Coventry and Us, Civic Partnerships Through the Decades, occupied the main display case with documents suggesting considerable research and perfect timing. The exhibition opens Monday, Vellum explained, as Pubright examined photographs of municipal delegations dating back to the 1960s. I've been preparing it for months, gathering materials that demonstrate Flaxborough's commitment to interurban cooperation. The timing, given recent events, seems particularly appropriate. The display included the controversial 1972 Civic Exchange visit with photographs showing Mayor Hartover's predecessor shaking hands with Coventry officials. One photograph appeared freshly mounted, its adhesive marks still tacky. A cardboard poster tube leaned against the display case, post office issue, the sort Minnie Tooth had mentioned seeing near the roses. Borrowed from council stores, Vellum noted following Purbright's glance. They insisted on proper protection for historical materials, ugly things but functional. The inspector observed how Vellum's fingers bore that particular shine acquired by those who handle cards repeatedly, a professional gloss that might easily transfer aromatic traces from contaminated keys to buff cardstock. The librarian's opposition to modernization had generated considerable correspondence, all carefully filed and cross-referenced with the dedication of someone defending a personal kingdom. Modernization means computerization, Vellum explained with distaste. Electronic databases replacing proper catalogue systems, fluorescent lighting destroying contemplative atmosphere. They want information processing centers rather than temples of learning. Dr. Naylor received Pubright in the Adult Education Center, a former schoolroom that retained chalk dust temperament and the moral authority of past correction. The retired headmaster wore disappointment like academic robes, his grievances precisely catalogued and regularly rehearsed. 30 years I taught evening classes in classical literature, he declared with educational fervor. Then Harold Peebles decided adult learning was a luxury the town couldn't afford, cancelled the entire program without consulting those who understood its value. Now, municipal offices waste money on consultants while genuine education withers. His conversation revealed intimate knowledge of council finances and particular antipathy toward ceremonial expenditures. The 1972 Coventry visit represented, in his mind, exactly the sort of wasteful junket that diverted resources from serious educational purposes. A blue pencil appeared during their discussion, emerging from his waistcoat pocket with practiced efficiency to correct errors in what appeared to be draft correspondence. Harold Peebles occupied his municipal office like a man expecting either rescue or arrest. His desk supported neat stacks of documents related to library modernization, each pile secured with elastic bands and labeled in careful handwriting that suggested organizational anxiety rather than confidence. Terrible business, this anonymous letter affair, he said, adjusting papers that required no adjustment. Creates entirely the wrong impression about municipal governance. We run a tight ship here, Inspector. Proper procedures, careful accounting, full transparency. His protestations of financial propriety carried the defensive tone of someone accused of nothing specific, but feeling obligated to deny everything possible. The library modernization vote had been postponed, pending further consultation, a delay causing him considerable distress. The Coventry partnership from 1972, Pubright inquired conversationally. Successful arrangement? Peebles achieved deeper pink. Ancient history, Inspector. Different administration, different procedures. We've implemented much stricter financial controls since then. Every expenditure properly documented, receipts filed in triplicate. Mrs. Troke's house reflected her organizational principles, with committee minutes filed chronologically and correspondence arranged by subject matter. She received Pubright in a sitting room that suggested the Women's Institute, extended its influence into domestic architecture, complete with moral furniture and educational upholstery. The anonymous letter represents a breakdown in proper communication, she declared with editorial authority. If someone has legitimate concerns about municipal conduct, they should present them through appropriate channels. Grievances require signatures to deserve consideration. Her blue pencil appeared during conversation, emerging from her handbag with practiced efficiency to make corrections in draft minutes. Each amendment received careful attention, applied according to principles that brooked no compromise with casual grammar. Yet something in her manner suggested the pencil had acquired significance beyond its editorial function. She handled it with protective care, as if concerned about its security or unauthorized use. Lucy Denby, encountered outside the post office, with municipal correspondence balanced against her hip, took Pubright's questions with secretarial precision and careful neutrality that suggested extensive practice at revealing nothing while appearing helpful. "Mr. Peebles will draft a public note about the library vote," she said, as if the inspector had requested a schedule. "The mayor prefers harmony to drama. Coventry is a partner city." The phrase used at the flower show was unhelpful to ongoing relationships. Her handbag remained firmly secured across her wrist throughout their conversation, like a small fortress containing secrets that required constant protection. Leo Biddle observed through his shop window, arranging books with theatrical precision, provided useful contrast to the investigation's expanding respectability. His display featured anonymous letters through history, prominently positioned among works on civic responsibility and social ostracism, an arrangement possessing subtle wit without requiring explanation. Pubright's weekend inquiries revealed a community where small frustrations had accumulated into larger resentments. Each citizen harbored grievances that seemed trivial individually, but collectively suggested an atmosphere of wounded dignity and thwarted ambitions. The anonymous correspondent was hiding not among obvious troublemakers, but within the ranks of those most trusted with municipal responsibility, someone who moved through institutional spaces with official authority, handling keys and documents, and committee materials as part of regular duties. Most significantly, the investigation had identified multiple suspects with access to the materials required: buff catalogue cards, contaminated keys, blue pencils, and intimate knowledge of municipal procedures. The debt to Coventry, whatever its nature, connected to current controversies through channels more complex than simple historical grievance. Monday morning brought Leonard Vellum to his professional sanctuary with the measured step of someone who had spent 30 years treating books as personal acquaintances. The library's Victorian dignity greeted him with customary silence, though something in that silence suggested conversation had recently ceased rather than never begun. He unlocked the main door with his usual precision, then paused in the entrance hall with the instinctive wariness of a curator who sensed unauthorized rearrangement. The disturbance announced itself at the historical display case, where his carefully mounted Coventry and Us exhibition had acquired an unscheduled alteration. A precise crack ran diagonally across the glass panel, not the random damage of youthful enthusiasm, but a deliberate line suggesting someone had applied pressure with scientific accuracy. The fracture began at a point exactly 6 feet from the floor, convenient for a person of average height wielding appropriate tools. Inside the case, Vellum's exhibition remained largely intact, though one photograph had received surgical attention. The 1972 civic delegation to Coventry, 12 members of Flaxborough's council posed with dignified formality outside the cathedral, now displayed a neat, circular void where one face had been excised with craft knife precision. The missing individual had occupied the second row, slightly behind the front rank of dignitaries, the position typically reserved for those whose importance was acknowledged but not celebrated. "Councillor Pemberton," Vellum murmured to himself, consulting his exhibition notes. Mrs. Pemberton's late husband, who had served as treasurer for the Cultural Exchange Committee, had been removed from history with remarkable care. The remaining figures maintained their municipal dignity despite their colleagues' disappearance, their formal smiles now seeming to acknowledge an absence they could not name. The catalogue card system had received equally selective attention. Several drawers stood partially open, their contents suggesting methodical searching rather than random destruction. Cards were missing from specific sections: municipal partnerships, local government finance, building contracts, all dating from the early 1970s. The gaps appeared in alphabetical sequence, indicating someone who understood filing systems and knew precisely what they sought. Inspector Pubright arrived at Vellum's telephone summons, bringing with him that quality of unhurried attention which made witnesses feel simultaneously important and transparent. He examined the cracked glass with professional interest, noting the precision of the impact point and the absence of scattered fragments inside the case. Entry was gained through the rear window, Vellum explained with librarian efficiency. The sash was lifted rather than forced, someone familiar with the building's particular quirks. Nothing else appears disturbed, just the display and specific catalogue entries. The inspector detected that familiar aromatic signature clinging to the display case, lavender polish transferred from contaminated keys, now fainter but unmistakably present. Someone with legitimate access had visited during weekend quiet, selecting materials with the confidence that comes from understanding exactly where everything belongs. Harold Peebles arrived while Pubright examined the damaged photograph, his complexion achieving new depths of administrative anxiety. The town clerk carried himself like someone expecting either rescue or arrest, his usual pink colouring deepened by what appeared to be guilty knowledge or elevated blood pressure. "Inspector," Peebles said, producing an envelope from his briefcase with the care reserved for dangerous insects. "This was under my office door this morning. Another anonymous communication." The second message employed identical materials and methods: buff institutional cardstock, precise typing, that faint lavender breath suggesting common origins. The words carried more specific menace than general accusation. Delay the modernization vote or face profound silence. "Profound silence," Peebles repeated, as if the phrase itself threatened municipal stability. "What does that mean in practical terms? Is it a threat against the library or against those who support modernization?" Pubright noted how the anonymous correspondent had escalated from public accusation to private threat, shifting from general municipal criticism to specific demands. The library incident demonstrated planning, access, and intimate knowledge of both the building's vulnerabilities and the historical materials contained within. Mrs. Pemberton arrived as news of the disturbance travelled through Flaxborough's efficient communication networks. Her reaction to the mutilated photograph carried personal as well as professional distress, widow's loyalty combining with committee authority. "That's my Stanley they've removed," she declared, consulting the remaining
figures with defensive pride.
He organised the entire Coventry exchange, handled all financial arrangements. Very proud of that partnership, he said it represented municipal cooperation at its finest. Dr. Naylor appeared with pedagogical indignation, treating the library attack as assault upon civilization itself. "Vandalism against learning represents society's decline," he pronounced with educational authority. "This modernization controversy has created an atmosphere where ignorance feels emboldened to attack scholarship. As morning progressed into routine investigation, Pubright reflected on the incident's implications. The anonymous correspondent had moved from general accusations about debts to Coventry toward systematic elimination of evidence related to the 1972 partnership. Someone was working methodically to ensure that whatever irregularities had occurred decades past remained buried beneath municipal respectability. The precision of the vandalism suggested not random destruction, but careful curation of historical memory. The debt to Coventry was acquiring definition through systematic concealment. Someone knew exactly what needed to remain hidden and possessed both access and determination to keep it that way. The investigation had entered a new phase, where public accusations gave way to private threats, and anonymous correspondence escalated toward direct action. The evening found Inspector Pubright in his temporary lodgings above Moldham's tea rooms, where the day's discoveries had arranged themselves in his mind like evidence requiring proper cataloguing. He sat by the window with tea that had achieved contemplative temperature, watching Flaxborough settle into its customary routines while considering the peculiar psychology of anonymous correspondence. Anonymous letters, he reflected, were the parish notices of cowards, combining the satisfaction of moral judgment with the safety of invisibility. They allowed correspondents to play God while remaining hidden among the congregation, inflicting reproach without accepting responsibility for consequences. In his experience, such communications fell into predictable categories. The genuinely wronged rarely chose anonymity, preferring dignified complaint. Cranks revealed themselves through excessive rhetoric. The most dangerous came from those who valued procedure above principle. The Flaxborough correspondent belonged clearly to this final category. Both messages demonstrated institutional knowledge, access to official materials, and careful attention to procedural detail. The typing was precise, grammar correct, stationery appropriate. Even the timing showed professional understanding of municipal schedules and committee procedures. The lavender scent provided concrete connection between messages and perpetrator. Someone with legitimate access to the contaminated trophy case, Key had handled both communications, transferring aromatic evidence that linked them to official duties rather than criminal activity. This person moved through municipal spaces with authority, handling keys and documents as regular responsibility. The blue pencil mark suggested editorial habits, someone accustomed to correcting documents with professional precision. Yet its faintness indicated either careful control or borrowed equipment, revealing understanding of the significance of leaving minimal traces. Most tellingly, the correspondent had chosen invisibility while demanding visible accountability from others, a contradiction suggesting someone more comfortable with institutional authority than personal confrontation. They wrote not from weakness but from strength, using anonymity as tool rather than refuge. The escalation from public accusation to private threat revealed planning rather than impulse. The flower show message had served as warning, creating general anxiety about municipal irregularities. The library incident demonstrated surgical precision, eliminating specific evidence while showing capability for direct action. The second note to Peebles moved from past accusations to future demands, suggesting both historical knowledge and current leverage. Until debts to Coventry are settled, no honour shall remain untainted. The phrase revealed concern for honour, a concept often invoked by those whose own might be under scrutiny. It linked present to past grievance, suggesting long memory and simmering resentment. The dual meaning of Coventry, cathedral city and social ostracism, provided ready moral alibi for private preservation. The missing photograph spoke volumes. Councillor Pemberton's excised face represented more than vandalism. It was surgical removal of inconvenient history, Someone knew exactly what needed concealment and possessed both access and determination to ensure it remained hidden. Pubright's mental catalogue had narrowed to those with institutional access, editorial authority, and personal knowledge of the 1972 partnership. Leonard Vellum commanded his library with territorial devotion, possessing unlimited access to catalogue cards and historical materials. His opposition to modernization had generated extensive correspondence, all carefully filed. His exhibition preparation required handling documents, photographs, poster tubes, materials connecting to both original message and subsequent incidents. Mrs. Troke's editorial precision and protective attitude toward her blue pencil suggested someone who valued procedural correctness above personal comfort. Her committee responsibilities provided access to official materials and municipal schedules. Her defensive reactions indicated either innocent indignation or guilty knowledge. Harold Peebles controlled municipal finances and procedures, possessing intimate knowledge of both current controversies and historical irregularities. His anxiety about the Coventry partnership suggested personal stakes beyond professional duty. Dr. Naylor's educational background and editorial habits fitted the correspondent's demonstrated literacy, while his resentment about cancelled programs provided motive for municipal criticism. Yet something suggested the truth lay in directions more subtle than obvious guilt. The correspondent's methods indicated not amateur malice but professional capability, someone who understood systems well enough to manipulate them effectively while maintaining plausible innocence. The debt to Coventry was becoming clearer through systematic concealment rather than direct revelation. Someone had invested considerable effort ensuring past irregularities remained buried, using anonymous accusations to distract attention while eliminating evidence of their own involvement. The anonymous correspondent appeared to be playing multiple games simultaneously, accusing others of impropriety while concealing evidence of their own involvement, demanding accountability while refusing identification, claiming moral authority while employing morally compromised methods. Tomorrow would require more direct approaches, testing theories against reactions, observing who betrayed themselves through excessive caution or rehearsed innocence. The investigation had reached that delicate stage where patience must give way to gentle pressure, where Pubright's characteristic courtesy would serve as both velvet glove and iron fist. The truth, like good evidence, would reveal itself when properly encouraged rather than forcibly extracted. Tuesday noon found Inspector Pubright arranging what he described as a return of property meeting in the Corn Exchange's side room. His notices had been phrased with deliberate vagueness. Items mislaid at recent municipal events. A description calculated to attract anyone whose conscience harbored uncomfortable secrets. The response proved gratifyingly comprehensive. Mrs. Pemberton arrived first, clipboard in hand like a ceremonial sword, establishing territorial authority near the refreshment table. Leonard Vellum chose a chair providing clear views of all exits while maintaining scholarly detachment. Harold Peebles sat with the rigid posture of someone expecting either vindication or arrest, his usual pink complexion deepened by what appeared to be either guilt or elevated blood pressure. Mrs. Troke's handbag rested in her lap like a small fortress, while Dr. Naylor assumed his pedagogical stance with the authority of someone prepared to correct civilization itself. Leo Biddle slouched with theatrical innocence, clearly anticipating entertainment. Lucy Denby arrived carrying municipal files as if they might explode if handled improperly. On a modest table, Pubright had arranged recovered items: a lady's glove with mother-of-pearl buttons, spectacles in a case labelled property of the thoughtful, a tape measure, and, positioned with apparent casualness, a half-empty bottle of lavender furniture polish with its cap beside it. "Thank you all for coming," Pubright began with characteristic courtesy. "I've recovered several items that appear to have been mislaid during recent events. I thought it proper to return them personally." He produced a buff card from his jacket pocket, handling it with the careful attention reserved for evidence. The card bore typing that appeared identical to the anonymous messages, though closer examination would reveal subtle differences designed to test observational skills. "This was found near the prize displays," he announced, reading with deliberate precision. "It appears to be a library catalogue card, though it contains some rather unusual elements." The word catalogue hung in the air like grammatical blasphemy. Leonard Vellum's face twitched with automatic correction, his lips forming the proper spelling before professional caution could restrain him. The librarian's fingers moved involuntarily, as if reaching for an invisible editorial tool. "Catalogue," he murmured, unable to suppress institutional instincts entirely. "Surely it should be catalogue in proper English usage." Mrs. Troke bristled visibly at the American spelling, her hand moving toward her handbag with protective urgency. "The correct form employs the complete spelling," she declared, with editorial authority. "Abbreviated versions have no place in official correspondence." Dr. Naylor produced a blue pencil, as if summoned by linguistic emergency, holding it with the practiced grip of someone who had spent decades correcting similar transgressions. "Elementary orthography," he pronounced with pedagogical disapproval. "Any educated person would recognize the proper form." Pubright noted each reaction with mild interest, observing who reached instinctively for correction tools and who carefully avoided touching anything at all. Harold Peebles had gone quite pale, his hands remaining firmly clasped as if physical contact with evidence might prove incriminating. The card also contains the phrase, "while arrangements are made," the inspector continued conversationally, "though I believe the preferred form in official documents would be whilst." Mrs. Troke's editorial sensibilities flared. "Whilst is the proper municipal term," she announced with authority. "While belongs to domestic correspondence." "Most educational," Pubright murmured, then lifted the lavender polish bottle. This was also recovered. Someone appears to have spilled it recently near the trophy case. Minnie Tooth, summoned for her expertise in domestic accidents, confirmed ownership. "Made a right mess of the key, I did. Anyone handling it afterward would carry the scent away." The inspector held up the contaminated key, its brass surface still bearing aromatic traces. Several people unconsciously examined their own hands, as if evidence might still cling to their fingers. "Most interesting is this pronunciation guide," Pubright continued, producing a reference card. "Coventry, for instance, the cathedral city. Some say Coventry, while others prefer Coventry." Leonard Vellum's automatic correction emerged before caution could prevent it. "The proper pronunciation is Coventry," he declared with librarian authority. "Historical consistency demands accuracy." The correction revealed intimate familiarity that went beyond casual knowledge, someone who had researched the subject thoroughly, perhaps for exhibitions or presentations. "Fascinating how these details accumulate," Pubright mused, arranging his materials with deliberate care. Spelling preferences, pronunciation habits, access to specific supplies, rather like signatures in their way. The assembled group had grown increasingly quiet, each person calculating what their reactions might have revealed. Mrs. Troke's blue pencil had disappeared into her handbag with suspicious speed. Dr. Naylor's corrections had ceased entirely. Harold Peebles maintained perfect stillness, as if invisibility might be achieved through immobility. Most tellingly, Leonard Vellum had begun arranging imaginary papers with nervous precision, his fingers moving in small, practiced gestures. The unconscious motions of someone accustomed to checking documents, making corrections, ensuring everything met proper standards. "I believe that covers everything requiring return," Pubright concluded pleasantly. Thank you all for your assistance." The meeting dispersed with careful dignity, each participant uncertain whether they had been cleared of suspicion or merely granted temporary reprieve. The inspector remained behind, reflecting on reactions that had revealed considerably more than intended confessions. His little test had confirmed several theories while generating new questions about motives and methods. The truth was emerging, not through dramatic revelation, but through the quiet observation of human nature under polite pressure, exactly as Colin Watson's Inspector Pubright would have preferred. The library's reading room possessed that particular atmosphere of enforced contemplation which made even guilty consciences feel obligated to whisper. Inspector Pubright had arranged the afternoon's gathering with characteristic courtesy, describing it merely as clarification of recent municipal
irregularities.
The assembled worthies, Mrs. Pemberton with her committee authority, Harold Peebles radiating administrative anxiety, Mrs. Troke clutching her handbag like a small fortress, Dr. Naylor in pedagogical dignity, and Leonard Vellum maintaining scholarly composure, settled themselves among the reading tables with the careful precision of people uncertain whether they were attending vindication or accusation. Leo Biddle had arrived uninvited but tolerated, positioning himself near the poetry section with theatrical anticipation. Mayor Hartover occupied the head table with ceremonial gravity, while Superintendent Chubb provided official weight to the proceedings. "Thank you all for coming," Pubright began with mild courtesy. "I believe we can now resolve the matter of our anonymous correspondent and the recent disturbances." He produced the original buff card in its protective sleeve, handling it with the respectful attention reserved for evidence that had finally agreed to cooperate. The evidence? Assembled. "The materials tell a remarkably clear story," the inspector continued conversationally. "This buff cardstock proved not to be expensive stationery, but a withdrawn catalogue card from this very library. The Rudge brothers confirmed it wasn't their stock. They described it as institutional, library-like. Only someone with administrative access could appropriate such materials without creating obvious gaps in the filing system." Leonard Vellum's fingers began their unconscious paper-arranging motions, though his expression remained carefully neutral. The lavender scent, which clung persistently to both messages, came from Minnie Tooth's accidental spill on the trophy case key. Anyone handling that contaminated key would carry away aromatic evidence of official access. The blue pencil mark in the corner initially suggested Mrs. Troke's editorial authority, but closer examination revealed it as careful imitation. Rather than habitual use, someone borrowing familiar symbols to deflect suspicion. Mrs. Troke's hand moved instinctively toward her handbag, then stopped as she realized the gesture might prove incriminating. The typing demonstrated institutional familiarity, precise, grammatically correct, employing preferred municipal spellings. Most tellingly, our correspondent chose anonymity while demanding accountability from others, suggesting someone more comfortable with procedure than personal confrontation. The historical connection. Pubright moved to the damaged display case, its cracked glass now covered with brown paper. The library incident provided the final pieces: the surgical removal of Councillor Pemberton's face from the 1972 photograph, the selective theft of catalogue cards relating to municipal partnerships and building contracts, all demonstrated intimate knowledge of what needed concealment. Mrs. Pemberton bristled defensively. "Stanley handled all arrangements for the Coventry exchange with complete propriety." "Indeed he did," Pubright agreed mildly, though the partnership involved complexities that wouldn't bear modern scrutiny. The correspondence files reveal that a young clerk named L. Vellum worked for the Coventry contractor during that period, facilitating arrangements between the two councils. When the contractor encountered financial difficulties, that same clerk helpfully suggested accepting display equipment credits in lieu of final payment, equipment that found its way into this very library. Leonard Vellum's scholarly composure cracked slightly, his territorial devotion to the institution warring with personal preservation. The debt to Coventry was never financial, the inspector explained. It was reputational. Your early employment created a paper trail connecting you to arrangements that, while not criminal, would prove embarrassing for someone positioning himself as guardian of institutional integrity. The anonymous letters served multiple purposes, creating general anxiety about municipal corruption while eliminating specific evidence of your involvement. The revelation. You orchestrated both incidents to protect your position while discrediting
modernization plans, Pubright concluded calmly. The flower show message established public concern about historical irregularities. The library break-in eliminated inconvenient documentation while demonstrating your capability for direct action.
The second note moved from past accusations to future demands, delay the modernization or face exposure. Vellum straightened with professional dignity intact despite exposure. The library represents institutional memory, he declared with quiet conviction. Electronic systems mean destruction of everything I've spent 30 years building. Sometimes preservation requires unconventional methods. Mrs. Troke found her editorial voice. Leonard borrowed my blue pencil last Thursday for exhibition corrections. Returned it Friday morning with apologies for keeping it overnight. The borrowed pencil explained the faint mark, careful control rather than habitual use, understanding significance while maintaining deniability. You used your legitimate access to create the anonymous correspondence, Pubright observed. Buff cards from withdrawn inventory, keys you handled as committee member, institutional knowledge acquired through decades of service. The lavender, scent transferred when you touched the contaminated key during flower show preparations. Quiet resolution. Leonard Vellum regarded his professional sanctuary. The green shaded lamps, oak tables, the ordered silence of proper cataloguing. If modernization proceeds, he said finally, 30 years of careful organization disappears into electronic databases. I wished them to understand what they were destroying. The confession carried the authority of someone who believed deeply in their cause while acknowledging questionable methods. Vellum had employed institutional tools to preserve institutional memory, using anonymous correspondence and selective evidence elimination to protect both his library and his reputation. The truth emerges quietly, Pubright noted with characteristic understatement. Like good cataloguing, it requires patience and proper attention to detail. The revelation settled over the assembled group like library dust, revealing how municipal respectability could mask territorial desperation. Leonard Vellum, defender of proper procedures and guardian of institutional memory, had used those very procedures to wage his campaign against progress. The mystery had resolved itself through observation of human nature under polite pressure, exactly as Flaxborough's municipal difficulties typically concluded, through quiet revelation rather than dramatic confrontation. The morning after the library's revelation, Flaxborough resumed its habitual rhythms, as if municipal intrigue were just another seasonal phenomenon to be weathered with a change of coat. A mayoral notice, drafted with Lucy Denby's careful diplomacy, thanked the constabulary for their clarification of misunderstandings and quietly postponed the library modernization vote for further consultation with stakeholders. The language, as always, allowed all parties to feel they had been right, without requiring anyone to admit having been wrong. Leonard Vellum returned to the library for a final week, setting his bone-handled paper knife and ink pad into a modest box, tidying the drawers with the air of a man conducting a private liturgy. The arrangement suited Flaxborough's way. Vellum would retire at quarter's end, his dignity preserved with a commendation and a consultant's title for as long as paper catalogues remained furniture. The display case glass was replaced without ceremony. The damaged photograph, now a copy, bore a small caption. Image altered.
Identity preserved elsewhere. Mrs. Pemberton, reading her late husband's name beneath it, nodded once, a gesture of rare indulgence. In the wake of Vellum's departure, Mrs. Pemberton accepted the interim library role, approaching her duties
with the efficient gravity she had once reserved for prize marrows and jam jars. Modernization, when it came, would do so in phases, catalogues to be digitized at a pace that allowed memory to catch up, and additional staff appointed to ensure the progress proceeded with the minimum of trauma. The Coventry Partnership, now reclassified as Archived Pending Historical Review, became another file in a cabinet that nobody was in a hurry to open. Elsewhere, the small but significant adjustments of scandal took root. Mrs. Troke, finding that even a blue pencil could blush, switched to black ink for her committee minutes, a quiet concession to the distinctiveness of her mark. Dr. Naylor, emboldened by the restoration of his reputation, secured a Thursday slot for Horace at the Methodist Hall so long as he finished before bell practice. Harold Peebles, his complexion returning to its natural shade, announced a community listening evening on modernization, where the public would be permitted to listen to itself under official supervision. Leo Biddle's bookshop window offered a brief squib on preservation. It is not what we save, but how, beside a neatly tied manual of cataloguing, both christening gift and memorial. He sent Vellum a discreet note. I don't approve of the method, but I understand the fear. 3 detective novels and a history of Coventry's rebuilding sold swiftly, evidence that the town's appetite for mystery and renewal remained robust. The Flower Show Committee, under Mrs. Pemberton's vigilant gaze, introduced new security. Rituals. Prize cards were now laminated, and all envelopes affixed personally by the steward, a solemnity that satisfied the need for visible caution. Minnie Tooth, on her knees with lavender and cloth, confided to Pubright that forgiveness, in Flaxborough, often began as housekeeping and matured into policy. The inspector agreed. Here, subtle changes lingered, like the faint scent of polish after a thorough cleaning. Meanwhile, Moldham's tea rooms processed the affair with their usual efficiency, trading theories for fresh gossip about bus shelters and the Harvest Festival. Sent to Coventry enjoyed a short revival, usually as a culinary verdict or a euphemism for committee exile. Lucy Denby's handbag, still formidable, no longer required constant vigilance. In his office, Pubright completed the necessary forms with that mixture of care and resignation known to all men whose work ends in pen rather than flourish. The box marked "Lessons," he wrote, "observe how ardently the respectable defend their methods, and how patiently truth prefers to be asked twice." He filed the buff card, still faintly lavender-scented, among the other quiet oddities of Flaxborough, confident that the town would continue to whisper loudly whenever discretion was most required. That evening, passing the library, Pubright glimpsed Vellum at his old desk, pen poised in thought, as if approving the filing of his own memories. The town, having whispered itself hoarse, was content to let order resume. Streetlights blinked on with municipal reliability. A cat negotiated a railing with more grace than policy. Somewhere a typewriter ribbon dried, and the air smelled, as always, of timber, polish, and enterprise.